Okay, I think we're going to begin. Welcome and good afternoon. Thanks for coming on this incredibly gorgeous sunny Saturday afternoon. My name is Samir Gandesha, and I'm the director of the Institute for the Humanities. And I'd just like to do a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that this event this afternoon is taking place on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This is especially important in light of the day on Friday in commemoration of Truth and Reconciliation, something that we really need to focus on, not just once a year, but every single day of the year. And I think that Truth and Reconciliation Day stood in a bit of tension with the previous Monday, where we were all, in a sense, forced to mourn the passing of the previous monarch and the succession to Charles III. And I think this is real tension within the Canadian state here. On the one hand, trying to engage in a meaningful process of truth and reconciliation, but on the other, paying obeisance to an ongoing colonial history. So it's also something to think about when we do a land acknowledgement. Anyway, I'd like to now turn the microphone over to my good friend and comrade Harinder Mahil, who's representing the Hari Sharma Foundation. It was really instrumental in making this event happen. So, Harinder.
Thanks, Amir. Generally, I do not speak at the Foundation's events. Our president does, Zahid Makhdoom. Zahid happened to be sick today, and so I've been given this responsibility to say a few words. First of all, I want to welcome all of you to this event. The event is being organized by Dr. Hari Sharma Foundation, SFU Institute for the Humanities, South Asian Film Education Society, South Asian Network for called SANSA, South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy, as well as the SFU's Wayne City Office of Community Engagement. I want to thank all these organizations for coming together for this event. I particularly want to thank the Institute for the Humanities and Samir for providing this room for this event. I'm not going to say anything about the film because we are going to be seeing it and discussing it. I do want to say a few words about Anand, the filmmaker, whom I've known since late 70s when he was in Montreal at McGill. We do have something in common. Both of us were born and raised in the same country, in India. I was highly influenced by Professor Daya Verma, who was one of the leaders of the Indian People Association North America. And my understanding is Anand spent some time was influenced to a great degree by him. I mean, what else can I say about Anand, whose work is admired all around the world, but he has difficulty showing his own movies in India. To give you an example, even the Canadian documentary that he made, A Time to Rise, was not allowed to be screened in India under the pretext that it will damage relations between the government of India and government of Canada. I mean, I had to write letters, and a whole bunch of us wrote letters that how stupid it is, because the film was funded by the National Film Board of Canada, which is a Canadian government entity. His latest documentary, Reason, which was released around the world in 2018, has not been released in India. The documentary that we are going to see today, they would not initially allow. There's a censor board, and each and every film, documentary, has to get a certificate from this entity. They would not allow him to show this movie, and they basically rejected it, and he had to fight in a court of law for 10 years before the certificate could be issued. I was talking earlier to a friend about Anand, and so his question was, so he makes movies about human rights and social justice. I said, you can say that, but those are very gentle words. He makes movies about workers' rights who can be arrested and shot and killed for going on strike. He makes movies about minorities, about Muslims, women's rights. I mean, Muslims these days are second class, worse than second class citizens in India. All I will say is great work. If you happen to see any of his movies, I just don't know how he manages it. I admire you, brother. We admire you and your work. Carry on. We're looking for the next project. So I think we should see the movie, and then we will have enough time to hear Anand.
So I'll introduce it. Okay, so just minor correction in what Harinder was saying. The Father, Son and Holy War and many of the court cases that I fought, some of them were about censor certificate, but many of so we won all those battles. The state was not allowed to cut a single frame of any of these films. We eventually won the matters in court. But this particular film and a few other films, we also went to court because these films in those days, which were different from the days of today, although the government didn't like these films and didn't want them shown, so the national television always said no to it. But we forced the national television, Doordarshan, to broadcast these films on public TV. So that was the court case that Father, Son and Holy War went through for 10 years. We won in High Court, they went in appeal, and finally we won in the Supreme Court, that they had to show this film as it was made on TV. And so, these court battles have gone on for almost every film, but things are much worse today than they have ever been in terms of freedom of expression, because earlier we were more worried about how do we get our films shown or how can we reach the public. Now we're also worried about what can happen. I mean, it's not just a matter of censorship. It's actually being a dissident in India carries a price. And I have many friends who are in jail right now because they dare to speak out. And there are a few people who have been killed. So these are difficult times. And when we first met in 1975 or 76, I'm not sure. I came first in 75, then I went back when the emergency ended in 77, and then I came again to finish my master's at McGill. And so we met in those days during the emergency. The times today are much worse than the emergency, although the public is not aware that there's an emergency. It's not been officially announced. But there's certainly an emergency if you happen to be a minority, emergency if you happen to be Dalit, emergency if you're any kind of dissident or from anywhere, from any class and any caste. Okay, so that's a general background. And this particular film was started in around the mid-80s and completed in 1994-95. So it took a long time. Although I made 3 films in this period. One film was called In Memory of Friends, or Una Mitra Di Yaad Pyari, which was during when the Khalistan movement was at its peak. We made a film on what was happening in Punjab. We followed groups of people who were trying to build unity in Punjab at the time against the violence both by the state and by the people who thought they were militants. Then I made a film called Ram Ke Naam, In the Name of God, which was about the Babri Masjid. At the time that I made the film, the Babri Masjid had not been demolished. But by the time we completed the film, it did get demolished, and I added a small epilogue. So that was In the Name of God, or Ram Ke Naam. And then this is the third part. So it's a kind of a third part in a trilogy of films that are looking at different aspects of religious revival or religious identity. But in each film, I tried to use a different kind of lens. So in the first film, which was completed, was In Memory of Friends. We used the writings of Shahid Bhagat Singh, because Bhagat Singh had written a pamphlet called Why I'm an Atheist. And he had written extensively about communal violence in his time. So we were using this as we traveled through Punjab, talking to people, reminding them of Bhagat Singh. And then the second film, Ram Ke Naam, is about, but here I was looking, so in the first film I was talking about class, because Bhagat Singh was talking about class. So we were talking about how class interests and class solidarity would be a way to fight communal virus. But by the time the second film was completed, the left was not so strong, and it had to take something more than that. So I was looking there at the issue of caste also. So Ram Ke Naam is talking about what's happening in Uttar Pradesh area, all throughout the country, but also looking at it through the caste prism. And we talked to a priest, a Hindu priest, who didn't believe that Hinduism is what these guys have made it. Not an exclusive kind of religion, but something that was much more inclusive. So, and he was the priest of the Ram temple, which they were talking about. And he was there saying that these guys are just doing it for the money and for the political power. And then this is the third film where I'm looking at not just caste and class, but I'm looking at gender. Because as I was making the film, I realized that what had happened is in 1987, there was a sati. A woman had been burnt on her husband's funeral pyre in Rajasthan. So I went there to find out what had happened. And what I saw made me realize that this is not just about, it is about religion, but it's also about the male psyche. So this film tries to look at that. And this film is in two parts, each 1 hour long. First part looks at what patriarchy is doing to women, so both Hindus and Muslims. And in the second part, we're looking at what it has done to men. So first part is called Trial by Fire, which is the Agni Pariksha, which is what Ram subjected Sita to prove her chastity. He made her sit in a pyre. If she survived, that means she was pure, and if she didn't survive, that means she wasn't. So, and in the second part is called Hero Pharmacy, because it's about the psyche of building the male so-called psyche of, you have to be brave and you have to be, this whole idea of manhood. Okay, so that's what I'll say for now.
Okay, so we have about 35 minutes for discussion of this quite extraordinary film that really casts a historical and analytical eye on the rise of various fundamentalisms in India, but it does so with incredible heart and incredible sensitivity. I think it captures the despair of those who have suffered and suffered terribly, but it also offers some glimmers of hope too. So I think there's lots to discuss, and maybe while people are mulling it over in their minds, what they'd like to say. Questions are most welcome. Comments. I'll just make a couple of announcements. On Monday, there's going to be a Thakur visiting Scholar Award to SFU 350, which is a students group that has done a lot of work on action on climate change. So that'll be happening here at Harbour Centre. And then we're especially excited to be hosting the inaugural Dr. Chin Banerjee Memorial Lecture in Anti-Racism on October 13th. And that is going to be a lecture talk by Robin Maynard, who's going to be discussing her most recent book, co-authored with Leanne Simpson, a very important Indigenous writer. So that'll be happening October 13th, and it'll be here at Harbour Centre. All the details are on our website. So I'll just open it up. Yeah, I think I'll just pass the microphone. So
I'm pretty loud.
we need to get you on the. If people don't mind, we'd like to have the questions register in the video.
Thanks for sharing your film. It was very moving. Wow. Okay, so I'm from the neighborhoods that are depicted in the riots in Bombay. That's where I was born. And I was there in '93 when that was happening. My family, I was 14 years old. My family was sequestering me in a safe cocoon at that time. And I didn't really know until later what was going on. But still then it was conceptual because I'd never seen footage. I'm more familiar with footage from 2002, Gujarat, which also has an unfortunate connection to lots of members of my family who support all of that crazy shit. And I have, essentially had to cut off like 95% of the people in my family because of these events. So watching this is a deeply emotional experience for me, and I just want to thank you for that. And I just have one question, because I'm studying fascism in the US, I'm studying fascism in other contexts as well, in order to fight fascism, obviously. And I'm struck by the role of sexual repression in all of this, and we see that in many contexts, and Eric Fromm wrote about that with regard to how libido was repressed and surrendered to Hitler during the Second World War, and Bal Thackeray, and such overwhelming footage of him, and these people are all admirers of Hitler, and we really see a close-up of the sexual and gender repression. Some of the work you did also referred to the motives of Godse's assassination of Gandhi, and probably you're familiar with Ashish Nandi's writing on all of that as well. So I'm just wondering if you could share with us some of your thoughts about sexual repression, gender repression, and if you've had time to think about these dynamics. Clearly it seems like you have, in like a broader human sense, because you took it back to this ancient question of patriarchy and matriarchy. And of course there's no essentialisms here about who's better, who's worse, just how this dynamic of repression seems to just consistently come up. And of course today in the US we see so much anxiety around gender from the far right as well. So a lot of people don't think that these kinds of communal violences can flame up in North America in the same way we've seen in India in the last 40, 50 years. And I disagree with those people. I think fascism is on its way here, and it follows the same script we see in this. So I'm curious if you can provide some guidance in all your wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read Nandi, but I've read what Nathuram Godse said in court, his justification for why he killed Gandhi. He's got a whole long essay about why he killed Gandhi. And one of the things he says is very clear. He said that Gandhi was emasculating the Hindus, that Gandhi was teaching non-violence, which meant that he was making Hindus effeminate. And one of the reasons that he killed Gandhi was for that, because he wanted Hindus to be real men. The same thing that's echoed in Bal Thackre's language, the same thing that's echoed today in Modi and all the other people who are in power. Again, we're talking, and this film is 1995, so it's before the BJP came to power. But this is the time when the right-wing forces were mobilizing. So they were in power in some areas. So in Maharashtra, the Shiv Sena came to power. Bal Thackeray is the leader of that, and in alliance later with BJP. So what we have today is like more of the same, much more of the same. So yes, you're right and that's why when I started to think about it, I could see the connection. But till that point, I hadn't actually thought about it. It was the sati that happened in Rajasthan that put me on the path of looking at gender while looking at religious violence. And once I started seeing it, it was there everywhere. You were spoiled for choice in terms of which examples to use. And you're right that it could have been, if I had been living in America, I could have filmed the speeches of George Bush Sr., Jr., any of them, or even earlier during Vietnam War. I mean, they were always talking about how they can't be defeated by a small nation. They've got to, they are the superpower. They've got to show their might. And it's always a male psyche, even though sometimes women are saying it. So that's why I showed Sadhvi Ritambara, so patriarchy is not biological in that sense. Patriarchy is a system of a psychological thing that applies, because once you live in that system, you conform to it. And it takes a long time before people start seeing through it.
Anand, in some ways, today's situation is much more serious and depressing than it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Where do we see the hope? I mean, despite what's going on, there are people struggling against it. I would want to leave this room with some hope.
Yeah.
And what do you see, being there?
Yeah, let me give you examples from this film so that, just to remind you, because I was very conscious, I'm very conscious in every film that I make, that I'm not there to depress the hell out of people. I have to tell the truth as I see it, but I don't want to leave the film with just the most depressing things. I could have made this much more depressing than it is. And today, also the same applies. But even in this film, you can see like a woman like Seema Hakim, who lost her husband in that brutal way and who was raped. What does she say? She says that my Hindu neighbors helped me. She's more like my sister than my own family. And so she says that those who did the rape were doing it not just to me, that they were doing it to their own mothers and sisters. And so she has a much broader view of what had happened. An amazing kind of resilience. And so we have no right to give up, because the people who have gone through that are still fighting. You see that in different parts of the film, how people have been resisting. A small group of people that in the midst of all that carnage were doing a peace march. They walked from Azad Maidan in Bombay to Thane, which is like a 2-day march, walking through affected areas, talking about peace. And the film comes back to that. The song is something that came out of those, that kind of the song Mandir Masjid, which runs through that film, has become now almost an anthem for those of us who have been fighting a communal virus. It was written by Vinay Mahajan, someone from Gujarat who witnessed all this happening. And many people are doing that. Yeah.
One of the interesting scenes here for me was Balasaheb Thackeray sort of talking derogatorily about the BJP. Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious about what is the nature of the relationship between the Shiv Sena and the BJP, both of whom you sort of followed, and how it has evolved over a period of time.
So they were in competition for that the Hindu vote. at that moment in time. Later they became united, and they, in fact, then not too long ago they split again, because what the Shiv Sena realized is that if we stay with the BJP, they'll eat us up, because they've got a much more and they're in power in the center. They've got all the money. So if we both of us are talking only about Hindutva, they're the ones who are going to gain, and they're going to wipe out our identity. So they split for about a year and a half or so. I don't remember how many. Yeah, about a year and a half. Uddhav Thackeray, Bal Thackeray is dead, by the way. So his son inherited his mantle. So his son became chief minister, initially with the BJP, then he split with the BJP. And he made an alliance with Congress and the NCP in Maharashtra. But very recently, the BJP managed to buy off 50 of his own MLAs. So they paid like 50 crores each, I believe. I mean, some people say it's more than that, for each candidate. Hid them away first in Goa, then in Assam, and then they toppled the government, and now they're in power. The BJP is in power. I mean, with a faction of the Shiv Sena is in power that rebelled against Thackeray's son, which would have been unimaginable a few years ago, because Bal Thackeray was like seen as the great leader of Maharashtra. So right now, in fact, the Shiv Sena is in a curious position of having an identity crisis. Some of them are trying to move away from BJP and Hindutva. They still claim, but not the most vicious brand of Hindutva. Yeah.
I'm interested in how you put the film together, because it seems to me that it must come from fragments that other people filmed as well, because you couldn't be, or could you couldn't plan to be at some of these
No,
sites.
there's no archival footage in this. It's all shot by me and a few. You saw the credits, so there's some other camera people who were my colleagues. So there's no. It's not that we pre-planned, had a script in mind, and then went out and filmed all this. We actually did. I do it the other way around. I actually do a lot of filming, and then look at the material and then see what the patterns are. So, as I said, I was actually filming from the mid-'80s till the mid-'90s, and 3 films came out of it. So it was too much material, and I subdivided them with different kind of lens in mind. That's why one was on Punjab, one was on Ayodhya, and this is the third part. But none of those were pre-planned in that sense.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very appropriate that this is the film that.
And even the narration in the film comes at the very end. I start theorizing the material only after I've looked at it for a long time. So I wasn't initially talking about patriarchy and all that, but that's what this material was speaking to. And I probably went a little bit overboard in terms of my imagining a matriarchy. I mean, I was careful how I worded it, that we're talking about prehistory, not to, we can't go in a time machine and know if there was a matriarchy before, but we're reimagining it for the future.
So, as I was saying, it's quite appropriate that this was a film that we chose to screen and discuss, because the Institute, about 5 years ago or so now, seems like a long time ago, we organized what we called a free school on what we called specters of fascism. And back then, there was a discussion about, well, it's a bit extreme to use this word.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a right word, shift, but fascism? And we had a discussion. We said, no, it's a spectral form, right? So there are elements of the past that are now haunting us in the present, but hopefully not in the future, but that remains open. And so within a couple of years, it became clear that no, we weren't being extreme at all. In fact, rather prescient, especially now in light of what's happened in Italy, with the brothers of Italy have now, I mean, it's the plurality of votes, and the Swedish Democrats. They come clearly out of a neo-Nazi skinhead scene, and I think that what you're doing here is really profound in terms of articulating through the lens of the camera a kind of theory of fascist subjectivity that's grounded in a sense of emasculated victimhood, a fear of women, a definition of the enemy.
A desire to control female sexuality and being terrified by it.
Absolutely. And so one of the talks that we had in this, one of the lectures in the Free School was on Klaus Teweleit's book. It was a 2-volume book called Male Fantasies. And it was a discussion of it was a kind of forensic analysis of the writings of the Freikorps who were coming home from the trenches in 1918. And very receptive to the idea that the politicians, the Jewish politicians, have stabbed us in the back. But what the main themes of these notebooks were was a hatred and fear of women.
Yeah, and also the 20s in Germany, if you go back to that time, it was a roaring 20s. It was where a lot of different kinds of liberations were happening.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially in cities like Berlin.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so this is, again, getting to the question of sexual repression, this becomes really important but I think Wilhelm Reich, in particular, the mass psychology of fascism. I think you brought that out so beautifully well. And it reminded me of this whole discussion maybe about 4 years ago, when the tensions with Pakistan were really ratcheting up, and this whole discussion of Modi's 54-inch chest.
Yeah.
And here you
56. He won't like it if it's 54.
I'm diminishing him, yeah. But this is the kind of idea of the king's two bodies, right? So the body of the king is strong and virile. That means the body of the nation is equally strong and virile. This was beautifully brought out.
And Donald Trump has a similar kind of following. I mean, and he deliberately probably did not hide the fact that he slept with lots of women and that he had no problem with that. I mean, he would repeatedly, when in the early days when he was running the first time, he's only done it once, I guess, so far. But in those debates, I thought this is the end of him because he virtually admitted to rape and but it didn't go against him.
No, the way he was stalking Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
That was quite, a self-conscious move, right?
Yeah.
To cultivate this extremely misogynist constituency. Yeah.
Hi. So this might be coming because I saw Narmada Diaries yesterday with you, and then this movie, this documentary too.
Yeah.
Also, I study Mumbai today. I study the movements in Mumbai today, and it was jarring to see, as a combination of both these films and what I study today, that not much has changed. The way it is being presented has changed. Like the example of Shiv Sena that you gave, Shiv Sena BJP combination. This whole Uddhav Thackeray's new kind of modern Hinduism, for the want of a better word, So my question is also about hope for younger researchers or younger people who want to study these things. And we watch these movies and sometimes we feel, oh my goodness, nothing has changed in 30 years. So what are we doing and how do we keep on doing this? So do you have a message for younger people who want to keep studying these things?
Don't just study. You have to do more than that. Yeah, eventually you have to do more than that. But no, I don't have a message as such. But I think that in terms of all the people who, like you said, you were disturbed and you had to fight with your own family, I think that is something that we all have to do if our families are on that path, that we've got to confront friends and family, because otherwise the fascism will keep growing. And I agree with you that we do use the word fascism a bit lightly. It's not the fascism of the full-blown fascism of concentration camps and gas being used on millions of people. We've not reached that stage, but the trajectory is the same. The desire is almost self-articulated. I mean, it existed 100 years ago, that desire. It certainly existed after Mussolini. I mean, a lot of these Hindutva, their ideologues actually learned. One of the guys actually went to Italy and saw the kind of youth that was being organized by the fascists in Italy, and then tried to implement it in India. Yeah, I mean, if you see the film that I made in 2018, I mean, completed in 2018, called Reason, then that connection becomes more direct. You can see the kind of the RSS, and it's almost modeled on, it's almost like they saw Leni Riefenstahl films and learned how to organize this crowd and the symbolism. And it's not an accident that Hitler or the people that he learned from took the symbolism from India. I mean, he took the swastika from India. It's not an accident, because the race theory is not different from Brahminical race theory. To keep, and Father Son Holy War talks about that, what was the meaning of caste? It was to keep the racial lines, racial purity, by not allowing castes to have intermarriages.
Well, first I want to say thank you for your important work. It's an honor to watch the film with you here. I'm curious, I see in the film like a lot of ways of repression, like a lot of ways in which repression is manifested. I'm curious about like how hard it was for people, especially for women, to share the stories with you, and like what was kind of like the whole process of you kind of like learning and filming their stories.
So some of the people I already knew and had been working with, because in Mumbai we were part of the peace movement. So like Shahnaz Sheikh, who organized with Muslim women, that you see her. She's somebody who studied Muslim law, and she fought a court case for her own divorce using the Indian Constitution, and so the group that she started, I filmed closely because they were people who were known to me. But in other places, I met people for the first time, and there was no pre-preparation. I mean, in Rajasthan, I was only there for a week or so. So the women that I met who speak against sati, they were not doing it because they met me or they knew what to say. They were doing it spontaneously. So there are two women there, and one of them has a completely, like, she's almost unbreakable in her faith that this sati really happened that way, that she, I said, look at that, she's using a picture that was these photo frames that are distributed at the sati site. And the photo frame, there's a cutout of the husband's picture superimposed with the, woman's picture, and then the burning pyre is a painting, and the trees are a painting, the temple is a painting, and the goddess is a painting. So, but in her mind, that is evidence that this really happened. I mean, those gods are there and the trees. And I'm saying, look at it more closely. So I'm arguing with her on camera, trying to get her to see. And she actually, if you look at it closely, if you see a film like this, I think needs to be seen several times because there's a lot of, it's very dense. So if you look at that again, you see that she's already wavering in her. Oh, she said, if God didn't do the burning, then who did? I mean, it's like, of course, God must have done it. Otherwise, how would she have burned? Because she's already asking herself that. So while one woman, but the reason for that is the difference between the two women is also caste. The woman whom I'm talking to, who's convinced that sati really happened, she's a cook in somebody's house. I mean, she was the maid servant in the place that I was staying, my friend's place, and she was the cook. So I wanted to film somebody who believes in the sati. So my friend said she does. So you talk to her. But she's a Rajput. Although she's a cook, she's a Rajput by caste. So she's like a upper caste, warrior caste. She's already predisposed to believing in the stories of the warrior caste, because in Rajasthan, sati is glorified, the act of sati, because they have invented the story that in the Middle Ages, when there was wars and with the Muslim rulers, that Rajasthan, the women, rather than when their husbands and their own kingdom fell in battle, they would commit sati en masse, that they would jump into the fire rather than fall into the hands of Muslim rulers. So they're talking about preserving honor above all. And that's the mythology. And there are sati temples even now that glorify the satis. So that's one person. The other person is a woman who is not upper caste. And she sees it very clearly for what it was, that it was a murder. That she gives us the truth about how it's done, that the woman is drugged, put on the pyre. She's not only tied up there, but she's also heavily sedated. And by the time the body responds to the burning, it's too late. She can't get away.
Hey,
and then you look at that's why you have to look at the film more closely. You look at these guys, the eyewitnesses to the sati, and you can see the glee on his face when he says she was burned only up to her chest. So he's getting a kind of a sexual thrill out of the whole process of this woman on fire. And he says she was smiling. She was obviously howling in pain, but he saw it as she was, ecstatic.
Yeah, thanks
and then I also intercut that with the Ramayana that was being played on television, which is the Sita, Ram burning his wife, Sita, in this. That's why that part of the film is called Trial by Fire, because that is the fire that Ram subjected his wife to, because his wife had been abducted by the Sri Lankan king, Ravana. And then when he got her back, he wasn't sure that she had slept with that abductor. So she said, "You have to sit in the burning pyre." And this television serial, which went into every home in India, was glorifying that moment, where she goes into that fire. And then the connection is that what I filmed was 1987 to 1990, but by a few years later, and these people in Rajasthan were demanding a temple for the sati that had just happened, and that demand for a temple starts to resonate a few years later in Ayodhya, where they want to build a temple again.
Thanks for making the movie. It's the first movie of yours that I've seen, and I can't wait to watch all of the other ones. Something I found pretty interesting watching the movie was the arguments of the Hindu right have been pretty much the same, like the dog whistling about in a few years, Muslim population would be more
the
than
population.
the population. Anything against the status quo is just labeled as foreign funded. How India is the only country where minorities enjoy more rights than the majorities. It's just now, rather than being spoken from election rallies, they're just sent as WhatsApp forwards or just spoken from news studios. But I just thought it was pretty interesting that people keep on falling for the same narrative over and over again.
Yeah, because the state is promoting that. It's no longer, I mean, what a big difference between then and now is that these guys are in power. They're unshakably in power right now. And and then they're promoting that, the myth, the myth that goes on is, hum do, hamare do, wo panch, unke 25. Because that means that, to translate it, that we have this family planning program, that two-child policy. We are two and we'll create 2 kids. But Muslims are allowed 4 wives, and so they make 25 children. Now, the illogic of that doesn't occur to anybody, that just because one man marries 4 wives, it doesn't give them more children. I mean, if 4 men married 4 wives, they'd still have 4 children. And if one man married 4 wives, they'd still have 4 children. So just because one man married 4 wives in the same community, it doesn't increase the population. And the facts, the best way to find out is the census figures, whether the population of Muslims has increased dramatically from independence till now, and it hasn't. They talk about Christians. I mean, the Christian population actually diminished.
Hi. Thank you for the wonderful movie. This is the second one I watched. I also watched Ram Ke Naam, great movies. And my first question is that where can we get others? I could see there were 25 of them in your drive. Can we copy that drive? No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
No, there is I do have a distributor in North America, and they distribute to university libraries. So libraries in the universities can buy all these films from a place called DocuSeek.
That's a wonderful thing.
DocuSeek, and individuals like you can, there is also a platform like Netflix, but much, much smaller. It's a very tiny platform. So tiny that they haven't been able to pay me for getting the rights to show all my films. But the good for the individuals is that it's fairly cheap to get on. It's called Ovid, OVID TV.
Okay.
So Ovid TV, you can see all these films.
Okay, great. And a question too. It's kind of what I'm seeing this. What you're talking about is in 90s, and like the gentleman mentioned, I was in Bombay in 93. I grew up in Calcutta. Bengalis are supposed to be very progressive people. It's kind of shocking, and I did my engineering from Bengal. So I have a WhatsApp group where all those Bengalis, there are like 300, 400 of them. But my point is that this idea used to be, when you look at this in 90s and all that, most of the people look not very educated. But the extent to which this idea, this fascism has penetrated in educated society is very shocking, even in a progressive society like that of Bengalis.
Used to be progressive.
That's what. BJP had no foothold in Bengal for a very long time. And even Bengalis, we never had growing up, of course, we always know there's an undercurrent against Muslims and all that, the simmering feelings and all that. But the way they have come up now, if anytime you mention anything, that the kind of messages they put across there on those platforms, and these are I'm the only there are only probably 5% non-Bengalis on that group. I had to finally leave that because I couldn't take it how many people I'm going to fight with at the end of the day. But, it really worries. And if the educated people and if the progressive people like Bengalis have started doing that kind of stuff, have started, basically, these used to be like people living in slums standing, talking about these kind of things that katua ko kaat dena chahiye, ye kar dena chahiye. Now, if it has gone to the drawing room of education,
but I want to interrupt you slightly, because in my experience the reverse is true.
Okay.
That the secular values exist in the working class more than they exist in the so-called educated class.
Could be,
the communal virus is coming from the middle classes and the educated classes. Because they're the ones, and they're also the ones that the British targeted. I mean, so all this is in a way we are trying to excuse ourselves by saying this, but all this is to do with colonial divide and rule policies that were implemented very systematically. I mean, if you go back to 1857, where Hindus and Muslims united again, fight against the British, and then they took not only then, but they were doing it even earlier, but then they took serious measures to make sure that they're separated, they're divided. They had, if you look at the regiments that they created, even in the army, they're all identified by, there's a Sikh regiment, there are community regiments. So there's a caste regiments, there's a Mahar army, there's regiment, so they targeted, I talk about that in this film also, how they created the notion of the martial races. The creation of the martial races, because that's what they wanted to use in their armies, and they wanted to make sure that their armies don't unite against them. So they had to keep them completely divided. And we are suffering the after effects of that. Partition happened because of that. Because of systematic division. When they did partition, they didn't give the vote to the working class. The Muslims who voted for Pakistan was the elite Muslims who had the vote. They had to be educated, they had to have property. So the working class Muslims were never asked, and they were in the majority, and they were not in favor of and there's a wonderful book, I'm sorry I'm not carrying it, but there's a book written by a friend of mine called whose name is Shamsul Islam, and he's written a book about Muslims against partition, which was the vast majority. And nobody talks about it. Nobody in Pakistan talks about it for obvious reasons, and nobody in India talks about it for the same reason.
Yeah. So how I wanted to end was that, what is the hope? Would this ever be reversed? Because it has gone from bad to worse.
Yeah.
Like, would it ever be reversed, or what happened? What do you think?
I think it can be reversed. It's just that I think all of history works. We used to believe, we who call ourselves progressive, used to believe that things keep changing for the better, that progress means every generation is better than the next. But actually, if you look at it, it goes in waves. It goes this way, and then it comes back that way, and then it goes again that way. So there's no room for, if you're on the downside of the curve, doesn't mean it's not going to rise again in the other direction. And, it's also perhaps part of human nature that you always create the other. The other might be caste, the other might be color, the other might be religion. And all you have to do is to keep educating yourself and the people around you, to educating or asking people to think for themselves.
Well, I think this is a good note on which to end. So, Anand, thank you so much again.
And I recommend you all, when you do watch my other films, watch a film which I made during the Khalistan movement called Ona Mitra Di Yaad Pyari. Yeah. No. Yeah, that's the first one. The one which talks about Bhagat Singh. We should actually show it. It's time to start showing it. We can't be afraid of those who because I think that people are capable of rethinking. I literally have had so many people from the hardcore RSS background and BJP background who, if I could get them to watch the whole thing, which is not easy because they're not allowed to watch it. But if they actually sit down and watch it, and then we have a discussion, it's amazing because they've been fed wrong facts. And many of them wake up when they actually are confronted with the facts.
And I'd like to also thank you all for coming out this afternoon, evening, and hopefully we'll see you at some of our future events. Take care.